My name is Clare Anderson, and at 68 years old, I never thought my only son would try to kill me. Thomas was my pride and joy after my husband died. We were close, or so I believed. Then I discovered he had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy in my name without my knowledge. The next day, he handed me a cup of tea with an unusual smell. My instincts screamed danger. I pretended to sip, but secretly saved that tea in a small vial. Before I tell you what was really in that tea and what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Jack, my husband of 35 years, passed away from heart failure 15 years ago. The transition to widowhood was not easy, but I managed to build a quiet, comfortable life in my modest home in Portland, Maine. My retirement from teaching high school science provided a small pension, and I supplemented it by giving piano lessons to neighborhood children 3 afternoons a week. The extra income wasn't much, but it allowed me small pleasures like tending to my garden and occasionally dining at my favorite seafood restaurant by the harbor. Thomas had been my rock through it all. Our only child, born when I was 26, had grown into a smart, ambitious financial advisor with what seemed like a bright future ahead. He helped me manage my modest savings after Jack died, ensuring I was financially secure, if not wealthy. Every Sunday, like clockwork, he would come for dinner bringing fresh flowers and stories about his work and friends. We maintained our holiday traditions religiously, from our 4th of July barbecue to our cozy Christmas Eve gatherings where we would read A Christmas Carol aloud just as we had done when he was a child. "Mom, your apple pie is still the best in New England," he would say, taking a second slice. "Some things never change, and I'm grateful for that." I cherished those moments, feeling blessed to have raised a son who still made time for his aging mother despite his busy schedule. But things began to shift 3 years ago when Thomas married Heather, a glamorous interior designer with expensive tastes and social connections that seemed to open doors for him professionally. At first, I was thrilled to see Thomas happy. Heather was charming during our initial meetings, complimenting my home and asking for my pie recipe. But gradually, our Sunday dinners became less frequent. Holidays were spent with Heather's family in Connecticut, or at exclusive resorts I couldn't afford to join them at. When they did visit, Heather would glance around my modest home with barely concealed disdain, occasionally making comments about upgrades they could help with. "Claire, you really should let Thomas help you modernize this place," she once said, running a manicured finger over my treasured antique sideboard as if checking for dust. "This old furniture is probably full of mold spores. Not good for someone your age." Thomas changed too. He bought a sprawling house in an upscale neighborhood, complete with a pool and home theater. Then came the luxury car designer suits and memberships to exclusive clubs where he could network with wealthy potential clients. During his increasingly rare visits, he seemed distracted constantly, checking his phone and steering conversations toward financial matters. "The market's been tough lately," he confided, during one visit loosening his Italian silk tie. "But we're managing. The house needs some work, though. Heather wants to remodel the kitchen again. Says the marble we installed last year is already out of style." I noticed the strain in his eyes, the tightness around his mouth when he discussed money. But whenever I expressed concern, he brushed it off, assuring me everything was under control. Yet his questions about my health became more frequent and pointed. "How's your blood pressure, Mom? Any dizziness lately? You should get a full checkup, you know. At your age, things can change quickly." His insistence that I undergo various medical tests struck me as odd, but I attributed it to natural concern for an aging parent. After all, my own mother had suffered a sudden stroke at 70, and perhaps Thomas worried about hereditary conditions. Last month, he called with unusual enthusiasm. "Mom, Heather, and I want you to come over for a special dinner next Friday. I need to discuss something important with you." When I asked what it was about, he was vague. "Just some financial planning for your future. Nothing to worry about. Heather's making her famous roast. You'll love it." I agreed, looking forward to spending time with my son in what had become a rare treat. Little did I know that this invitation would lead to a discovery that would shatter my world and force me to question everything I thought I knew about the child I had raised. The following Friday arrived with a burst of early autumn sunshine. I baked a fresh batch of blueberry muffins, Thomas's childhood favorite, and arrived at his house 30 minutes earlier than the agreed time of 6. Thomas had given me a spare key for emergencies when they first moved in, though I rarely used it. Today, seeing no cars in the driveway, I decided to let myself in rather than wait outside. "Thomas, Heather." "It's Mom," I called out, stepping into the vast marble foyer. No answer. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the gentle bubbling of the elaborate fish tank in the living room. I placed the muffins on the kitchen counter and noticed a stack of mail haphazardly piled next to an empty coffee mug. A large envelope with the logo of Atlantic Life Insurance had been torn open, its contents partially visible. What caught my eye was my own name printed on one of the documents peeking out. A sense of unease crept over me. Why would Thomas have insurance documents with my name on them? Perhaps he was helping me consolidate my policies. I had given him power of attorney for financial matters after Jack died, trusting him completely with my modest affairs. Curiosity and concern prompted me to slide the papers from the envelope. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a life insurance policy for $2 million on me, Clare Anderson, with Thomas listed as the sole beneficiary. The policy had been taken out just 3 months ago, yet I had no recollection of signing any such document. My hands trembling, I examined the signature at the bottom of the form. It looked like mine, but I hadn't signed this. Someone had forged my signature. "This can't be right," I whispered to the empty kitchen. "There must be some mistake." I flipped through the other papers, finding payment receipts, policy details, and a letter congratulating Thomas on his wise investment in financial security. The policy included something called an accelerated death benefit rider that would pay out quickly in case of terminal illness. Thomas's laptop sat open on the kitchen island. His email account still logged in. A string of messages between him and Heather caught my attention, the subject line reading, "Plan B." My moral compass wavered momentarily about invading their privacy, but my growing sense of dread pushed me forward. "Did you get the policy finalized?" Heather had written 2 months ago. "We need that quick payout option if we're going to make this work." Thomas's reply chilled me to the bone. "All set." Mom has no idea. The agent didn't even question the signature. Further down the email chain, Heather had written, "Your mother's house would sell for at least $300,000 in today's market. Combined with the policy, we could clear all our debts and have enough left for the investment opportunity. Time is running out, Thomas. We need to move forward." My knees weakened, forcing me to grip the counter for support. My own son had forged my signature on a life insurance policy worth $2 million. He and his wife were discussing my house's value, a house I was very much still living in. The implications were too terrible to contemplate. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted me back to reality. I quickly replaced the documents exactly as I'd found them and moved away from the laptop. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sought to compose myself. Should I confront Thomas immediately, Would that be safe? In that moment, survival instinct trumped maternal feelings. I grabbed my purse and hurried out the back door, circling around to the street where my car was parked. Through the front windows, I could see Thomas and Heather entering their home unaware of my earlier presence. I drove home in a fog of disbelief and heartbreak, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice to collect myself. The son I had raised, the boy I had read bedtime stories to and nursed through childhood illnesses, had forged my signature on a life insurance policy that would benefit him only in the event of my death. That night was the longest of my life. Sleep evaded me as I paced my small living room, alternating between tears of betrayal and moments of fierce denial. There must be an explanation, I told myself. Perhaps Thomas was setting up some kind of surprise trust fund for my benefit, but the emails I'd seen left little room for innocent interpretations. As dawn broke, my phone rang. It was Thomas, his voice cheerful and casual. "Morning, Mom. Sorry about dinner last night. Heather wasn't feeling well, so we thought it best to reschedule. How about you come over for tea this afternoon instead? Around 3, I still have those financial matters to discuss with you." I agreed, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "That sounds lovely, Thomas. I'll see you at 3. As I hung up, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if the financial matters he wanted to discuss were merely a pretext? What if my son's plans for my future were far more sinister than I could have ever imagined? After Thomas's call, I sat in my kitchen clutching my old porcelain mug, the one Jack had given me on our 20th anniversary. My tea had gone cold untouched as my mind raced through possible explanations for what I had discovered. My hands still trembled as I opened my laptop and typed life insurance fraud family members into the search bar. The results were disturbing. Case after case appeared of family members, particularly adult children, taking out policies on parents or relatives without their knowledge, followed by suspicious deaths ruled as accidents or natural causes. In several instances, poison was the weapon of choice, often substances that mimicked natural illness or were difficult to detect without specific testing. "This can't be happening," I murmured, shutting the laptop as if closing it could somehow erase the horrible thoughts forming in my mind. I needed to talk to someone, but who I had few close friends since retiring, and none I would burden with suspicions this grave about my own son. Then I remembered Margaret, my old colleague from teaching days. Before teaching high school science, she had been a nurse for 20 years. More importantly, she was discreet and level-headed. I dialed her number with shaking fingers. "Claire." "What a lovely surprise," Margaret answered warmly. "It's been too long." "Margaret, I need to see you today. It's important." Something in my voice must have communicated the urgency because she didn't ask questions. "Come over now. I'll put on coffee." An hour later, sitting in Margaret's sunlit kitchen, I recounted everything from finding the insurance documents to the suspicious emails and Thomas's invitation for tea. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "Claire, I don't want to alarm you, but this sounds very suspicious. If Thomas is having financial problems, and if he and Heather are desperate enough—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You should not eat or drink anything he offers you today. You think my own son would try to poison me." The words hung in the air, almost too terrible to contemplate. "I hope not, but you need to be cautious. Do you still have those small vials from your science teaching days, the ones you used for demonstrations?" I nodded slowly. In my basement was a box of teaching supplies I had kept after retirement, including small glass vials with secure stoppers. "Take one with you. If he offers you something to drink that seems suspicious, find a way to preserve a sample. If nothing happens, wonderful. But if you feel ill afterward. I left Margaret's house with a sense of purpose cutting through my confusion and pain. Back home, I retrieved a small vial from my basement and tucked it into my purse. Then I sat down and tried to process how my life had come to this moment. I had raised Thomas alone for most of his childhood. Jack worked long hours at the lumber mill, often taking double shifts to save for Thomas's college fund. When Thomas was accepted to Cornell University with a partial scholarship, we were ecstatic. Jack had worked himself to exhaustion to provide that opportunity. The heart attack that took him just 2 years later seemed almost predictable in retrospect, his body finally surrendering to years of physical strain. With the life insurance money from Jack's policy, I had been able to cover the remainder of Thomas's education. I never remarried, focusing instead on my teaching career and supporting Thomas through his early professional years. I had been so proud when he established his financial advisory firm, seeing it as the culmination of all our family's sacrifices. When had things changed? I recalled Thomas's wedding to Heather 3 years ago, how she had admired my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable heirloom I possessed. "Those would look stunning with my wedding dress," she had hinted heavily. When I explained the necklace was promised to my niece, Jack's sister's daughter, Heather's smile had tightened momentarily before she recovered her composure. After the wedding, Thomas's visits became less frequent. He began mentioning investment opportunities that required substantial capital. When I expressed concern about his increasingly lavish lifestyle, he assured me his business was thriving. "Appearances matter in finance, Mom. Clients need to see success to believe in it." Now I wondered how much of that success had been real and how much was facade. Opening my online banking portal, I reviewed my accounts that Thomas helped manage. There were several recent withdrawals I didn't recognize labeled as portfolio adjustments. Small amounts, nothing that had triggered alarm, but they added up to nearly $15,000 over 6 months. The phone rang, startling me from my investigation. It was Mrs. Pembroke from next door. "Claire, dear," I was meaning to ask, "is your son conducting some sort of survey? He was asking me and several other neighbors about your daily routine last week. Something about arranging a surprise party for your upcoming birthday." My birthday was 8 months away. What kind of questions was he asking? Exactly. I kept my voice casual, despite my racing heart. "Oh, when you usually take walks, if you ever travel overnight, whether you have any regular visitors, that sort of thing." I thought it was odd timing for birthday planning, but he said it was a big surprise requiring months of preparation. I thanked her and hung up my suspicions, solidifying into a terrible certainty. Thomas wasn't just monitoring my finances, he was studying my habits, perhaps looking for the perfect opportunity. My phone buzzed with a text message, "Looking forward to tea, Mom, 3 p.m. sharp. I have a special imported blend I think you'll love. Thomas." The casual tone struck me as incongruous, given what I now suspected. Was I overreacting? Had grief and loneliness led me to imagine a conspiracy where there was only a son's well-intentioned financial planning? But the forged signature on that life insurance policy was real. The emails discussing quick payouts were real. And now the surveillance of my daily routine under false pretenses was real. As much as it broke my heart, I could no longer deny that my son might be planning something unthinkable. I picked up the small glass vial and placed it carefully in my purse. Then I prepared to face the child I had once cradled in my arms, now possibly my greatest threat. At precisely 3 o'clock, I pulled into the circular driveway of Thomas and Heather's expansive colonial-style home. The property, with its manicured lawns and ornate landscaping, had always seemed excessive to me, a monument to conspicuous consumption rather than a warm family home. Today it felt positively ominous. Thomas greeted me at the door with unusual enthusiasm. "Mom, right on time as always." He embraced me, and I forced myself to return the hug feeling like an actress in some bizarre play. Was this really my son, the same boy who had once brought me dandelion bouquets and homemade Mother's Day cards? "Where's Heather?" I asked, noticing the quiet house. "Spa day with her friends. She sends her love." Thomas guided me through the marble foyer into their formal living room, a space so pristinely decorated it never looked lived in. "How are you feeling today? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I assured him, taking a seat on the stiff white sofa. "Just didn't sleep well last night." "Blood pressure giving you trouble again?" he asked, with what seemed like excessive concern. "You really should see Dr. Winters about adjusting your medication." I had never mentioned any blood pressure issues to Thomas because I had none. My yearly physicals had consistently shown excellent health for my age. This fabricated medical concern only heightened my suspicions. Thomas disappeared into the kitchen and returned carrying an ornate silver tea tray. 2 delicate porcelain cups sat beside a matching teapot, adorned with hand-painted flowers. A small plate of expensive-looking chocolates completed the arrangement. "I've been saving this special tea for an occasion," he explained, pouring the steaming liquid into the cups. "It's an imported blend, quite rare. Cost a small fortune, but I thought you'd appreciate it." I watched carefully as he handed me a cup. The tea had an unusual color, darker than normal, with an almost greenish tinge. When I inhaled, there was a faint, bitter aroma beneath the expected fragrance of tea leaves, something chemical that triggered alarm bells in my scientific mind. "It smells interesting," I commented, pretending to take a small sip, but not allowing the liquid to touch my lips. "What kind did you say it was?" Thomas named an exotic variety I'd never heard of, explaining its supposed health benefits with rehearsed enthusiasm. "It's particularly good for the heart and circulation. Drink it while it's hot. That's when the beneficial compounds are most active." His insistence made my skin crawl. I pretended to take another sip, then set the cup down and deliberately changed the subject. "You mentioned wanting to discuss some financial matters," I prompted, reaching for my reading glasses in my purse, simultaneously confirming the presence of the small vial. Thomas seemed momentarily thrown by my redirection, but recovered quickly. As he launched into a complex explanation about estate planning and retirement accounts, I noticed his eyes repeatedly darting to my nearly full teacup with poorly concealed impatience. "Aren't you enjoying the tea, Mom? It's getting cold." "It's lovely, just letting it cool a bit more," I assured him, then deliberately steered the conversation toward his own finances. "How's business these days? That new office space must come with quite a lease payment." A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "Business is fine. Challenging market, but we're managing." His forced smile didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of finances, I've been meaning to ask if you've updated your will recently." "My will? No, not since your father passed." "Why?" "Just good practice to review these things regularly. And have you given any thought to your funeral preferences? I know it's not pleasant to discuss, but it's better to have these things settled." The casual way he brought up my funeral sent chills down my spine. I excused myself to use the bathroom, taking my purse and leaving my teacup on the table. In the privacy of the powder room, I removed the small vial from my purse. My hands trembled as I returned to the living room waiting for an opportunity. When Thomas's phone rang and he stepped into the hallway to take the call, I quickly poured most of my tea into the vial, secured the stopper, and tucked it back into my purse. I left a small amount in the cup for appearance's sake. Thomas returned, looking slightly agitated. "Sorry about that. Where were we?" "You were asking about my funeral preferences." I reminded him, watching his reaction carefully. "Right, yes. Just practical planning, Mom. No one lives forever." He glanced at my cup. "You've hardly touched your tea." "I'm not feeling very well suddenly," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. My stomach was knotted with anxiety and grief. "I think I should go home and lie down." Thomas's expression cycled rapidly through several emotions, disappointment being the most prominent. "Are you sure? What symptoms are you feeling? Maybe you should stay here so I can keep an eye on you." No, I'll be fine. Probably just tired." I gathered my purse and stood. "We can continue this discussion another time. At least finish your tea before you go," he insisted, a new edge to his voice. "It might make you feel better." "I'll take a rain check on that," I said, moving toward the door. "Thanks for understanding, Thomas." He walked me to my car, his hand on my elbow, feeling less like support and more like restraint. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see him standing in the driveway, watching my departure, with an expression I couldn't quite read, but which filled me with dread nonetheless. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Margaret's house, the vial of tea secure in my purse and a terrible certainty growing in my heart. My son, my only child, had just tried to poison me. "You did the right thing," Clare Margaret assured me, as she examined the vial of tea I had brought to her kitchen table. Her face was grave, matching the weight that had settled in my chest. "Paul should be here soon." Paul Reynolds was Margaret's friend, a lab technician at Portland Medical Center. When Margaret called him with a sanitized version of my situation, he had agreed to test the sample unofficially. Now we waited the afternoon, stretching into evening, as I replayed every moment of the encounter with Thomas, searching for any sign I might have misinterpreted his intentions. What if I'm wrong? I whispered more to myself than to Margaret. What kind of mother suspects her son of attempted murder? Margaret squeezed my hand. A mother who pays attention. A mother who trusts her instincts. Paul arrived shortly after 7, his lab coat still on, suggesting he had come directly from work. He greeted me with professional courtesy, his expression betraying no judgment about my suspicions. "I can run a basic toxicology panel, but comprehensive results will take time," he explained, accepting the vial. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Anything that shouldn't be in tea," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Particularly substances that could cause health problems, or worse." Paul nodded soberly. "I'll call as soon as I know anything. Try not to worry too much until we have facts." Facts. Yes, I needed facts before I could fully accept the horrifying conclusion my mind was racing toward. After Paul left, Margaret insisted I stay in her guest room. "You shouldn't be alone tonight, Claire. And frankly, I'd be concerned about you returning home if your suspicions prove correct." The next 2 days passed in an agonizing limbo. I called in sick to my piano students and stayed with Margaret, jumping whenever the phone rang. Thomas called 3 times each message, expressing concern about my abrupt departure and asking if I was feeling better. "The tea has special medicinal properties," he said in his last voicemail. "You really should try it again. I could bring some over if you're not up to going out." His persistence only deepened my suspicions. During those endless waiting hours, I sifted through memories of Thomas's childhood, searching for signs I might have missed, indications of the capacity for such calculated betrayal. I remembered how, at 12, he had lied convincingly about breaking a neighbor's window, maintaining his innocence, even when confronted with evidence. At 16, he had taken my credit card without permission to buy expensive sneakers, then claimed I had forgotten giving him permission. Small breaches of trust that I had attributed to normal teenage testing of boundaries. Had I been too lenient, too willing to see the best in him? Or had something fundamental changed in my son when he married Heather? I recalled his increasing fixation on wealth and status over the past few years, how the humble values Jack and I had tried to instill seemed to erode with each passing year. On the second night, unable to sleep, I used Margaret's computer to search for information about Thomas's financial advisory firm. What I found was disturbing. A business news article from 3 months ago mentioned Thomas Anderson's company was under internal review by the Securities and Exchange Commission for possible irregularities in client fund management. Nothing had been proven, but several clients had filed complaints. Then, I found Heather's social media accounts. Her posts showcased a lifestyle well beyond what I believed Thomas's business could support: a new sports car, exotic vacations, designer clothing, with price tags casually displayed. One post showed credit card receipts for a shopping spree totaling over $9,000, captioned "Retail Therapy, because I deserve it, blessed, treat yourself." Margaret found me at the computer at 3 in the morning, staring at years of evidence of my son's spiral into financial desperation and moral compromise. "Their lifestyle is unsustainable," I whispered. "They're drowning in debt, Margaret, and I think I'm their life raft, or I would have been if—" "Don't go there yet," she cautioned. "Wait for Paul's results." The call came the following afternoon. Paul's voice was grave. "Mrs. Anderson, I've completed the initial analysis of the T sample you provided." A pause. "The liquid contains ethylene glycol in significant quantities." Ethylene glycol. The term was vaguely familiar from my science teaching days. "It's the primary component in antifreeze," Paul explained gently. "When ingested, it causes symptoms that can mimic alcohol intoxication or natural illness, depending on the dose. It affects the central nervous system, heart, and kidneys. In sufficient quantities, it's lethal." The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as the confirmation of my worst fears crashed over me. Margaret took the phone, asked a few clinical questions, then thanked Paul before hanging up. I collapsed onto Margaret's sofa, a keening sound escaping my throat before I could suppress it. The evidence was irrefutable. My son had attempted to poison me with antifreeze, a substance that would have caused my painful death while potentially mimicking natural causes, especially in someone my age. "I can't believe it," I sobbed. "I cannot believe my child would do this." Margaret sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Claire, you need to go to the police." "No." The word burst from me with surprising force. "No police." "Not yet. I need to understand why. I need to hear it from him." "That's too dangerous," Margaret argued. "He tried to kill you, Claire. This isn't a misunderstanding or a mistake." But maternal instinct, powerful even in the face of betrayal, drove me to seek answers before justice. "I raised him, Margaret. I changed his diapers and kissed his scraped knees and sat up with him when he had nightmares. I deserve to know why he turned into someone who could do this." Margaret's expression was a mixture of compassion and exasperation. "And if he tries again, I'll be prepared this time." A strange calm was settling over me, the shock giving way to resolve. I'm going to confront him, but on my terms, and I want evidence of his confession. This isn't a television show, Claire. This is your life. Exactly. My life. And before I turn my only child over to the authorities, I need to look him in the eye and hear the truth. I need to know if anything of the boy I raised still exists in the man he's become. Margaret sighed, recognizing my determination. At least, let me help you plan this confrontation safely. As the evening shadows lengthened across Margaret's living room, we formulated a plan. I would invite Thomas to my house, where Margaret would help me set up a recording device. She would remain nearby, ready to call police at the first sign of trouble. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the only way I could move forward without the crushing weight of unanswered questions. That night, I dreamed of Thomas as a small boy, his face alight as he blew out birthday candles. In the dream, he looked up at me and asked, "Did I make you proud, Mom?" I woke with tears streaming down my face, grief for the son I thought I knew mingling with dread of confronting the stranger he had become. The next morning, I called Thomas from Margaret's phone. "I'm feeling better today," I told him, keeping my voice light. "Could you come over this afternoon? I've been thinking about those financial matters you wanted to discuss." "Sure, Mom," he answered, sounding relieved. "How about 2 o'clock? "Perfect. And Thomas, come alone, please. Some of these financial discussions are private." Margaret drove me home, helping me prepare the small digital recorder she had purchased. We positioned it beneath a stack of financial documents on the coffee table, visible enough that Thomas might notice it once our conversation was underway, but not immediately obvious upon entering. "I'll be parked down the street," Margaret assured me, squeezing my hand. "If anything seems off, anything at all, call my cell phone. I've already typed 911 into my phone, ready to hit send." After she left, I moved methodically through my familiar rooms, touching photographs of happier times, wondering if this would be the last day I would think of this house as a sanctuary rather than the scene of an unthinkable betrayal. I changed into a comfortable sweater, and slacks applied a touch of lipstick, more as armor than vanity, and waited. Thomas arrived precisely at 2, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing what I recognized as his client meeting expression professional, but with calculated warmth. No tea this time, I noticed. "You're looking better, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. His eyes darted around the living room. "Are you alone?" "Yes, just us." I gestured to the couch. "Let's sit. We have a lot to discuss." Thomas settled himself, opening his portfolio to reveal neatly organized documents. "I've prepared some options for restructuring your retirement accounts. There are some excellent opportunities for growth if we adjust your allocations." I nodded, only half listening, as he launched into financial terminology that I suspected was deliberately complex to confuse me. My mind was focused on how to steer this conversation where it needed to go. "Thomas," I interrupted gently, "before we get too deep into these details, I'm concerned about you. You seem stressed lately. Is everything all right with your business with Heather?" His professional mask slipped momentarily. "Everything's fine, Mom. The usual challenges, but nothing to worry about." "Are you sure? You know you can tell me if you're in trouble." I reached for his hand. "I'm your mother. I would do anything to help you." Something in my tone must have reached him because his shoulders slumped slightly. "It's been a tough year," he admitted. "The market's been volatile. Some investments haven't performed as expected." "How bad is it, Thomas?" I pressed my voice, gentle but firm. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart clenched. "We've had some setbacks. A few clients withdrew their funds after some returns weren't what they hoped for. And Heather." He trailed off, then straightened. but we're handling it. That's why I wanted to discuss optimizing your finances. It's a good time to ensure everything is properly structured." I nodded slowly, then reached for the stack of papers on the coffee table, deliberately exposing the recorder. "I found something interesting the other day, Thomas. I'd like your thoughts on it." I pulled out the insurance documents I had secretly photographed at his house, now printed out. His face went pale. "Where did you get those?" "That's not important right now." I spread the papers between us. "What is important is that this is a $2 million life insurance policy on me with you as the beneficiary. A policy I never signed for." Thomas stared at the documents, then at me, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. "I can explain this." "Please do." "It's just financial planning, Mom. Every advisor recommends that family members have appropriate coverage. I should have discussed it with you first, but I knew you'd be resistant to the idea. So you forged my signature instead." My voice remained calm, even as my heart raced. "I wouldn't call it forging," he protested weakly. "I'm your financial advisor and have power of attorney. I was acting in your best interest." "And was it in my best interest when you served me tea laced with antifreeze?" The words hung in the air between us. Thomas's face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing without sound. In that moment, he looked like a frightened boy, caught in a terrible act, and despite everything my heart ached for him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally managed, but his eyes told a different story. "Thomas." I leaned forward, holding his gaze. "I saved that tea. I had it tested. We both know what was in it." His breathing became rapid, shallow. "You can't prove anything." "I'm not trying to prove anything right now. I'm trying to understand what happened to you. What was so desperate in your life that you could contemplate killing your own mother?" Something broke in him then. His face crumpled, and to my shock, tears began streaming down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. I couldn't go through with it anyway. I was going to knock the cup over, say it was an accident. I just couldn't." "But you planned it." I pressed my own tears, threatening. "You bought the antifreeze. You put it in the tea. You invited me over with the intention of killing me. Why, Thomas, why?" Between sobs, the story emerged. Thomas's firm was not just struggling, it was on the verge of collapse. He had made several high-risk investments with client funds that had failed spectacularly. The SEC investigation was more serious than the news had reported. He was potentially facing fraud charges. Heather had maxed out multiple credit cards, creating over $180,000 in personal debt on top of their underwater mortgage and car loans. Heather said she would leave me if I couldn't fix this. He confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. She said her friends were laughing at us behind our backs. She couldn't bear the humiliation of bankruptcy, of losing the house. So she suggested killing me for the insurance money, I asked, my voice hollow. Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. She called it accelerating your estate planning. Said it would be a mercy, really. You're getting older, might suffer from illness eventually. This way, your assets would help your family when we needed it most. The casual cruelty of recasting murder as mercy left me momentarily speechless. Before I could respond, the front door burst open. Heather stood there, her face contorted with rage. "Thomas! You idiot! What are you doing?" She stormed into the living room, then froze when she saw the documents on the table and the recorder now in plain view. "What is this?" Heather Thomas began rising to his feet. "Mom knows about the tea, about everything." Heather's eyes darted between us, her expression calculating. Then, remarkably, she laughed. "Oh, Claire, Thomas has been under so much stress lately. He's not well. Whatever he's told you is the product of an overworked mind." "I think we're past denials, Heather," I said quietly. "Thomas has already admitted what was in that tea." "Thomas is confused," she insisted, her voice hardening. "There was nothing in any tea except herbs and spices. I should know, I prepared it myself." Her inadvertent confession hung in the air. I had never mentioned to Thomas that I suspected the tea was poisoned, specifically only that I had it tested, and I certainly hadn't told him what substance was found. For Heather to know the conversation was about poisoned tea meant she was indeed involved. Thomas turned to his wife's shock, replacing his remorse. "You said you threw it away. You promised me you hadn't done it." Heather's facade cracked. "You weren't going to do it. Someone had to take action. We're weeks away from losing everything. So you decided my life was an acceptable price." I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Don't be so dramatic," Claire Heather snapped. "It would have been quick, painless, and your death would have meant something. It would have saved your son's career, his marriage, his future." The cold calculation in her voice chilled me more than any shouted threats could have. This woman who had smiled at my dinner table and accepted my wedding gift had plotted my death as casually as planning a dinner party. "I think you should leave my house," I said quietly. "Not without those documents, and whatever recording you've made," Heather declared, stepping toward the coffee table. Before she could reach it, the front door opened again. This time it was Margaret, accompanied by 2 police officers. "I heard enough," Margaret announced, her phone in hand. "I called them when I saw her arrive. I've been on the line this whole time." What followed was a blur of formal statements, evidence collection, and the surreal sight of my son and his wife being led away in handcuffs. The female officer, Detective Ramirez, was especially kind, ensuring I had support before they left. "We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to provide a formal statement," she explained. "In the meantime, is there someone who can stay with you tonight?" I looked at Margaret, who nodded firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." After everyone left, the house fell into an unnatural quiet. I sat on my sofa, where moments before my son had confessed to plotting my murder, and tried to comprehend how my life had shattered so completely in the span of a few days. "What happens now?" I asked Margaret, my voice small in the emptiness. Now she said, sitting beside me and taking my hand, "You begin to heal, and you remember that surviving this betrayal makes you one of the strongest women I know." As night fell over my little house, I wondered if she was right, if strength would be enough to rebuild a life from the ashes of such profound betrayal. But one thing was certain: the tea that was meant to end my life had instead given me the terrible gift of truth, and with truth, the chance to truly live whatever years remained to me. The months following that fateful confrontation passed in a haze of legal proceedings, emotional upheaval, and gradual painful healing. The justice system ground forward at its own pace, indifferent to the personal devastation in its wake. I attended every hearing, every arraignment, watching my son in his prison jumpsuit as lawyers debated the details of a crime that still seemed unreal to me, even as I had lived through it. Heather and Thomas were charged separately after their arrests. The evidence against them was substantial. The recorded confession, the lab results from the tea emails retrieved from their computers discussing the insurance fraud and inheritance acceleration, as they had so euphemistically called my planned murder. Investigators discovered that Heather had purchased antifreeze 3 weeks earlier at a hardware store, 2 towns over, paying cash, but captured on security cameras. Thomas, faced with overwhelming evidence, made a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for testimony against Heather and a full accounting of their financial crimes, he received a reduced sentence of 7 years for conspiracy to commit murder insurance fraud and various financial violations. Heather, unrepentant and unwilling to accept a plea bargain, was sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and related charges. At Thomas's sentencing hearing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared one, laboring over the words for days, trying to capture the unique agony of maternal betrayal. Standing at the podium, I looked at my son, his head bowed in apparent shame. The pain of knowing my only child planned my death for financial gain is beyond description. I began, my voice stronger than I had expected. But I also know the boy I raised who showed compassion and integrity before life's pressures and poor choices led him astray. I believe in rehabilitation and redemption, even in the face of terrible wrongs. I ask the court to consider that Thomas cooperated fully once confronted and has expressed genuine remorse. I paused, gathering myself for the hardest part. I do not excuse or minimize what he did. The breach of trust is profound and has forever altered our relationship. But I do not wish for vengeance, only for justice that allows for the possibility of healing both for Thomas and for myself. The judge nodded solemnly, taking my statement into account, along with Thomas's cooperation in determining his sentence. As he was led away after sentencing, Thomas looked back at me, mouthing "I'm sorry," before disappearing through the courtroom door. The first prison visit was the hardest. Sitting across from Thomas in the sterile visitation room, separated by a table under the watchful eyes of guards, neither of us knew how to begin. The son I had read bedtime stories to, taught to ride a bicycle, and sent off to college with proud tears, was now an inmate serving time for plotting my death. "Why did you come?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Because I need to understand. Truly understand, not just what happened, but how we got there. How the child I raised became someone capable of this." That first conversation was halting, painful, filled with tears and recriminations. But it was a beginning. Over subsequent visits, we slowly excavated the ruins of our relationship, examining how his childhood insecurities about money had metastasized into an adult obsession with wealth and status. How Heather had exploited and amplified those weaknesses, pushing him toward increasingly desperate measures to maintain their lifestyle. "I kept thinking one more investment would turn things around," he confessed during our third visit. "Then we'd be secure, and I could start being honest again. But each failure just led to bigger risks, bigger lies. I was drowning, Mom. Why didn't you come to me? I would have helped however I could. I was ashamed. You and Dad worked so hard, sacrificed so much to give me opportunities, and I squandered it all trying to impress people who didn't even care about me." It wasn't an excuse. There could be no excuse for what he had done. But it was at least an explanation, a glimpse into the distorted thinking that had led to such a horrifying plan. While Thomas served his sentence, I focused on rebuilding my shattered life. The media coverage had been mercifully brief. A local story about an attempted matricide. Wasn't national news, thankfully, but it had been enough to make me a curiosity in my small community. Some neighbors avoided me, unsure what to say. Others offered awkward sympathy that felt more burdensome than comforting. Margaret suggested I speak with a trauma therapist, and reluctantly, I agreed. Dr. Lillian Chen specialized in family betrayal trauma, and her gentle, forthright approach helped me navigate the complexity of grief, anger, love, and loss that consumed me. "You can love your son while condemning his actions," she told me during one particularly difficult session, "and you can forgive without forgetting or excusing." Is that even possible? I asked, doubtful. It's not only possible, it's necessary for your healing. Forgiveness isn't about letting him off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of bitterness. Slowly, with her guidance, I began to separate the son I loved from the desperate man who had conspired against my life. I learned to honor my positive memories without using them to deny the reality of his crimes. And gradually, I discovered that there was life after betrayal. 6 months after the arrests, I joined a support group for parents who had experienced severe betrayal by their adult children. The stories shared in that church basement were heartbreaking: financial exploitation, identity theft, abandonment, and in a few cases, physical harm. Yet these parents continued to seek understanding, to balance love with necessary boundaries, to rebuild their lives with remarkable resilience. Inspired by their courage, I approached the local senior center about starting a program on elder abuse prevention and financial self-protection. Using my experience as a cautionary tale, I created workshops that helped seniors recognize warning signs and protect themselves from exploitation, even from family members. Knowledge is power, I told my first group, and sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we need to be most careful with. The program expanded to several community centers across the county, bringing me a sense of purpose I had lost in the aftermath of the betrayal. I was using my pain to help others, transforming trauma into something meaningful. 3 years into Thomas's sentence, he was transferred to a minimum security facility with a financial literacy outreach program. Inmates taught budgeting, debt management, and responsible financial planning to at-risk youth and low-income adults. Thomas threw himself into this work with a dedication that reminded me of his father's work ethic. "I can't undo what I did," he told me during one visit, "but I can try to prevent others from making the same mistakes. I can show them that status and possessions aren't worth sacrificing your integrity, your freedom, or your relationships." His genuine remorse and commitment to change allowed a fragile bridge to form between us. It would never be the same. It couldn't be, but it was something, a tender shoot growing from scorched earth. 4 years and 7 months into his sentence, Thomas was released on parole for good behavior and continued cooperation with authorities investigating similar financial crimes. He moved into a small apartment in a neighboring city and found work as a bookkeeper for a nonprofit organization, helping former inmates reintegrate into society. His parole conditions included ongoing therapy and financial monitoring. Our first meeting after his release was at a public park neutral ground for both of us. He looked older, thinner, but clearer somehow, as if a feverish glaze had been wiped from his eyes. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he said as we walked along a tree-lined path. "I'm not sure I deserve it, but I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did, what I almost did. The person I became. I've learned something about forgiveness," I told him. "It's not a single moment, a magic eraser that makes everything okay again. It's a daily choice, a process that happens alongside accountability, not instead of it." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I want to be worthy of that process, however long it takes." In the years that followed, we rebuilt a relationship different from what we had before, more honest, perhaps certainly more conscious of boundaries and the fragility of trust. Thomas never asked to manage my finances again, instead encouraging me to work with an independent advisor with impeccable credentials. He sent monthly checks toward repaying the money he had taken from my accounts, small amounts from his modest salary, but consistent, tangible proof of his commitment to making amends. Heather, meanwhile, continued to serve her longer sentence, unrepentant. According to Thomas, who had no contact with her after their divorce was finalized during his first year in prison, she had apparently found a new target for manipulation, becoming engaged to a wealthy prison volunteer who believed in her innocence despite all evidence. 5 years after that terrible day, when I discovered the insurance policy, I sold my house and moved to a pleasant retirement community near the coast. The sale wasn't about fear or bad memories, but about embracing a new chapter focused on community, creativity, and peace. I joined a choir, took up watercolor painting, and continued my elder advocacy work. Thomas visited monthly, our conversations growing more comfortable over time. During one such visit, as we shared lunch on my small patio overlooking the community garden, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Mom? After everything?" I considered this carefully, watching a monarch butterfly dance among the zinnias before answering. "I am content, which is perhaps more valuable than happiness. I have learned that life can shatter in an instant, but also that we can gather the pieces and create something new. Not the same, but still beautiful in its own way." The tea that was meant to end my life instead gave me clarity I never expected. It showed me that love without boundaries isn't love at all, but dangerous sentimentality. That forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. That trauma can be transformed into wisdom and service to others. True love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be harmed. It means having the courage to set boundaries while keeping your heart open to healing. This is the lesson I never expected to learn, certainly not from my own son. But it has become the foundation of my remaining years, however many they may be. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply betrayed your trust? What helped you move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please hit the like button and subscribe to help others find it. Remember, even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone in our experiences. Thank you for listening, and may your own journey, whatever its challenges, lead you to peace and wisdom.